2 seconds. Hey, Nick, can you send him the link as well?
Yeah. Hey, hello everybody out there, and welcome to this week's HackSurfer Hangout. Today we're going to be talking with Ruoting Sun. He's the product marketing manager at Barracuda. Kind of focusing on sort of like the education side, you know, K-12, cybersecurity, keeping kids safe, things like that. As always, it's an open Q&A, so if anyone out there is watching, either on HackSurfer.com, you can post questions to at Jeff Ryan Peters, or if you're watching on Google, you can post questions right in the Google app, and we'll try to get to them. But how are you doing today?
Good, good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I thought this was kind of an interesting topic. I know you guys are kind of in sort of the K-12 cyberspace, and it's something I guess I never really think about too much. So I guess just to kind of kick it off, could you maybe just, I guess, fill us in with a little background on maybe yourself and what Barracuda does?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I do a lot of the product marketing management here at Barracuda for a lot of our security products. So that includes our content security products, which is basically the Barracuda email security product line, as well as the Barracuda web security product line. Those have historically done very well, particularly in the education space, and specifically within education. I think the K-12 customer base for those particular products are actually more so than some of our other products. Obviously, we also have network security product lines with firewalls, as well as application security as well. And then we have another side of the business that actually focuses on the storage and data protection and disaster recovery side of IT, with email archiving solutions, as well as backup and file sync and share solutions as well. So.
Yeah, I guess this is sort of an area, and I guess I'm probably pretty ignorant about. You know, when I went to school, I remember I think I was probably like 6th grade. We finally got the one computer that had internet access. So I guess, a lot of people, I guess, probably like me, are kind of ignorant to sort of some of the challenges that, I guess, face schools on the technology side and cybersecurity side. Anyone who's really over 30, I would guess. So could you kind of maybe just kind of fill us in what kind of challenges, the schools are having?
Sure. I think, at a fundamental level, I think there are a few things that schools definitely struggle with. Nick, you might want to cut your video off. Okay. I think and you don't want to mute also. Yeah, so I think there are a few. There's still an echo. Oh, it might be yours also. Can you mute your? You are muted. Jeff, can you hear us? Okay.
Yeah, I think you sound
perfect. Great. Yeah, so sorry about that. Technical difficulties on our end here. So I think there's a couple of issues that schools are particularly concerned with nowadays. Obviously, you had mentioned a couple of them. Social media, I think, is a big threat for a lot of K-12 customers who don't necessarily know what to do with the level of access and exposure that students should have to social media sites like Facebook, like Twitter, things of that nature. And so what we actually see from our side is that a lot of schools actually have a blanket policy where they go ahead and block all of social media without really understanding the benefits versus the harms. Obviously, the harms of social media, or the downsides, are pretty apparent. I think we see a lot of that in local news channels, as well as in national news, with whether it be cyberbullying or school threats such as gun violence or bomb threats, things of that nature. And I think the ability to actually disseminate that information spreads much quicker like wildfire throughout social media channels. But I think that there are definitely valuable. I think that there are definitely valuable causes of social media as well, around student and teacher collaboration. So, a good example, we actually have a customer whose, their entire athletic department actually goes through and, their entire athletic department actually goes through and posts all of their status updates and things of that nature on Facebook. When it comes to a high school swim teacher that needs to share their practice updates, or needs to share, what times meets and invitations are, they actually share that via a Facebook group. And so I think there are definitely upsides and downsides to social media. It's just a matter of understanding what school policies are and how students need to be able to leverage those usage policies to be able to basically better fit into not only the school policy around social media, but really the school policy around internet use and cybersecurity in general. And we definitely have solutions here that kind of give you that granular access and granular control over what parts of social media, what parts of Facebook, and what parts of Instagram and Twitter to allow and which parts to block. Separately, on top of that, I think there's also a big movement around enabling mobility initiatives in a lot of K-12 environments. If you look at the number of one-to-one device initiatives that have really, I think been adopted in a lot of K-12 environments, whether that's using Chromebooks or whether that's using iPads or laptops, they're all over the place. In fact, I would say probably well over 60% of our K-12 customers that we have here at Barracuda have some kind of a one-to-one or many-to-one device initiative where they're using iPads or they're using Chromebooks and handing them out to students as a replacement for, when you and I went to school, it was 5 textbooks in a backpack that we carried home every single day. So I think that presents a lot of different challenges as well, because all of a sudden now you have a lot of different devices, whether it be laptops or tablets or phones that are coming in and off of the network at any given point in time, right? And for a lot of schools, they have to provide that wireless access to be able to make sure that students get the technology aspect of the education as well as just the curriculum side. From a security perspective, to enforce and ensure that students, aren't exposed to inappropriate content or obscene content, and for schools to maintain CIPA compliance, they really need to fundamentally think about how to protect their mobile environment just as much as they thought about protecting their desktop and network environments 10 years ago. And I think that challenge is a lot greater now than it was back then. So I think those are probably the two main issues that we see a lot of K-12 organizations deal with today. I think there are some other ones that surrounding bandwidth usage and how much we've actually seen things like streaming media being leveraged in the classrooms really push a lot of schools' network usage and bandwidth load to the upper peaks, to the point where they're constantly having to revamp and improve their pipelines. And that's been a big driving factor for a lot of K-12 organizations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that second point you brought up I find kind of interesting, because I know there was a story, I believe it was just last year, like late 2013, where I think it was one of it might have been the whole Los Angeles school district tried to give out iPads to all the students. And there were some stories shortly after that happened about students taking them home and kind of bypassing the security, things like that. So yeah, I guess just for someone for these students who are getting these devices, I mean, like, how do you go about sort of protecting that? And then another thing I think that would be kind of common would be, theft, students getting them stolen or things like that. I don't know if there's any way to kind of protect against those two kind of things.
Sure, yeah. So I think that there are, and you brought up two very good issues. I think they can be addressed separately, right? So when you are talking about students hacking these iPads, in the case of LA Unified, and taking them home and being able to get to wherever they need to, that's kind of more or less enforcing device security on the actual device itself, whether that's a software agent that is deployed on those devices, or it's some kind of a mobile device management service that these devices can be enrolled in to not only manage and push out things like proxy settings and Wi-Fi settings, but also be able to actually track the usage and the physical location of these devices. Whether it's understanding what types of applications are on them, or where their physical location is with regards to whether they're on campus or they're at home, whatever that may be. So because they're two fundamentally separate topics, to address the device security piece, depending on the device that you're talking about. Obviously, in the case of LA Unified, they used iPads, but some of the solutions that we have here at Barracuda that goes along with our web security story is to actually help you protect against laptops, for MacBooks, help you protect Chromebooks, as well as iOS-based devices. And the way that we accomplish that via different platforms obviously has different implications. So for the laptops and for the MacBooks, it's a user agent that's installed on the device itself. For iOS-based devices, it's actually an application that you can use as a replacement for Safari. So a lot of schools what they'll do is they'll lock down the Safari application so that students actually can't use the native browser on iOS, and then they'll use what we have here called the Barracuda Safe Browser that is directly actually provisioned to our security products to be able to enforce the same level of granular control for students and for teachers on the network as well as off the network. And then there's a different set of solutions for Chromebooks. There's a different set of solutions for smartphones, things of that nature. And then on the management side of it, I think I think one of the things that a lot of schools don't necessarily think through when they're deploying one-to-one type initiatives is how do you actually manage this on a mass level, right? You take a look at, LA Unified. I think they spent north of $30 million or $40 million on these iPads. That's a lot of iPads, right? And if you were to just simply use the Apple Configurator tool to go and manage every single one of them individually, it would take a really long time. So it's not really efficient. And so to be able to have a cloud-based management service to be able to push out provisioning profiles, to push out payloads that include applications or payloads that include proxy settings and Wi-Fi settings at a mass scale, I think is actually very important. And so one of the things that we did this year in recognition of that is to actually offer our mobile device and application management service for free to all of our customers that have a Barracuda product. Because we kind of recognize that mobile security should not really be looked at as a separate vector. In fact, you do the same things on your mobile device that you do on your desktop, on your laptop, right? You check your email, you go on websites, you use applications, and so we shouldn't necessarily look at it as a whole different space, as I think a lot of other vendors do. But we should really look at it, and I think customers of ours look at it in terms of how mobility is actually incorporated into their overall security posture. And that's part of the reason why we have so many integration points with our MDM service, and part of the reason why we're actually releasing it for free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get to a couple of these questions that viewers have posted. Crispin, he wants to know, he said, on school systems, what actors are considered and what threats do they pose, such as students themselves changing grades, predators acquiring student addresses, etc.? Yeah, I know you kind of brought up those two main ones, but I guess a lot of people kind of think, in terms of like traditional kind of hacking and things like that. Is there any? Do you see? Is there like a threat out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think students themselves will always go about trying to change grades, right? Especially the kid who's getting the C or the D in the class. I think they're always trying to find ways to pull off an A or an A minus, whatever it might be. I think the part of it, I think, falls on social engineering. A lot of the unfortunate nature of the situation is actually we hear a lot of technology administrators or CIOs of school systems talking about social engineering in the sense of a lot of it actually is just training the classroom, training the teacher, training the staff to not leave their passwords out when they go on their lunch break, or not have that sticky note on their monitor that actually shows their credentials that students can use to get into their systems. When it's inside the network, there's very little that cybersecurity companies can do from a protection perspective, because obviously we're protecting everything that's kind of outbound, right? So if it's a student that's trying to hack into a system, we definitely have firewall systems that can do intrusion prevention as well as intrusion detection. We also offer application firewalls that can protect servers from SQL injections and cross-site scripting attacks, things of that nature. But when it's a lot of times we hear these situations and it's as simple as a student having stolen a teacher's password and they can get to everything that they need to. And at that layer, I think there's a certain sense of social engineering and responsibility from a policy perspective to make sure that these things don't happen, as well as from a training perspective. And then in addition to predators acquiring student addresses and things of that nature, we see a lot of that actually happening on social media more than anywhere else, right? Whether it's a fake Facebook profile or a fake, Twitter profile that predators are using and then chatting with students, and we actually have decided to take a stand against that. And so one of the products that we have actually has the ability to look into the actual traffic packets that are leaving the school network and look at the content that's inside, right? So it's something that we call web application monitoring and social media monitoring specifically. So you can actually go in and see what specific keywords or what conversations students are having from inside the network to outside the network on things like Facebook chat, Facebook comment, what things they're searching for on Google search, and then admins can actually choose to be alerted on those based on the keywords that are flagged, right? So if a student, let's say, Googles, how to make a bomb or how to buy a gun, those are obviously, queries that you want to be able to actually be alerted on. You want to know about these types of situations, and you want to alert the proper authorities and the proper officials when these types of things happen. And so from our side, we look at it as, look, we're going to provide the technology platform to help you enable and better address your policies. But I think it needs to be a healthy balance between policy and technology that really address a lot of these cybersecurity issues, whether it's students changing grades or it's a predatorial targeting on children that we see so prevalent in the media today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of following up on that, Heather has a question kind of about awareness. She says it seems like lack of security awareness of both students and teachers would play a large role in the security issues of the K-12 education sector. What would you say is actually the most overlooked security risk?
Okay, that's a good question. I think there's kind of two answers to this, right? I think that the security awareness from a vendor perspective, from a security vendor like the Barracudas of the world or like the Ciscos of the world, we look at security very differently and fundamentally differently than how the technology admin at a school or than how the CIO or the IT director looks at security, and also how the teacher looks at security. And so, when the teacher looks at security, it's more a matter of let's prevent the really bad things from happening, right? Let's make sure that if a student is contemplating harming themselves and they're posting something about it on social media, or if a student is dealing with a lot of cyberbullying, that it's addressed accordingly. The CIO or the IT director worries obviously about that, about the legality issues around that. But they also have infrastructure concerns, right? They're also worried about bandwidth utilization. They're also worried about policies. They have to worry about parents saying, why is my student getting onto this particular site if we recognize that the teachers allowed it, but I don't want them to be able to see this material. And then from a vendor perspective, we kind of have to be worried about the entire picture. We have to not only be worried about what teachers deem as appropriate versus inappropriate, as well as the challenges that admins and IT directors are trying to solve themselves. And so I would actually say that the most overlooked security risk within this particular sector or within this particular market is the social engineering aspect that I referred to earlier, right? It's the piece where I think a lot of our customers, a lot of technology admins expect vendors to be able to do everything and to be able to protect passwords from being stolen from a sticky note and things of that nature, or temporary access tokens from being shared on a whiteboard with too many students so that they can get access to everything. I would say again that the security policy that the school has itself needs to mirror what the technology can do, and vice versa. I think they should pick technologies, they should pick security technologies that best fit what their security policy is. And that differs from school to school. Some schools have archiving policies where they actually retain student records for up to 7 years. Other schools have policies to not do that at all, right? And so based on the stringency of your policies around things like social media, based on how stringent you want to actually take civil compliance and things of that nature, the overlooked piece is how you actually make the technology work with the policies that you've set in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I kind of wanted to ask you about, and also a question that Aaron has here. I guess in the news all the time you see all these stories about universities getting hacked, and I guess in my mind I'm just wondering why we don't really hear about like data breaches at like the K-12 level. I mean, you kind of mentioned that there's people are archiving and there's databases of this stuff. So I guess I'll just read Aaron's question here. He says, we hear all the time about universities getting hacked and breached, but not much about the K-12. And why is that?
Sure. Well, I think part of it has to do kind of with ability, right? I think it's much more likely that a CS major at a major university figures out a way to actually hack into the server systems at a college than it is a 10th grader or an 11th grader figuring out how to do that and getting into the school system. Now, that being said, it still happens, but I think that the difference between the two is more so around media coverage. I think the impact of a K-12 student hacking into a system to change their grades is relatively low compared to a college student hacking into a system or pinging a network firewall at, let's say, Stanford or let's say Harvard, and bringing down the entire network. Those are much more high-profile cases. But just to give you a perspective, there's about 4,000 to 5,000 post-secondary education institutions in the United States. So between universities, community colleges, vocational schools, things of that nature, there's about 4,000 to 5,000 of those. And then on the K-12 side, there's about 110,000, right? So the numbers speak for themselves in terms of, I think, there are far more schools, there are far more K-12 institutions that actually deal with security breaches and deal with security policy issues. But I think the difference is that they're not necessarily as high profile, because a lot of times it's a kid getting around the system to figure out how to play World of Warcraft on a computer game, on a school computer, as opposed to when Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook and brought down the entire Harvard network because too many people were trying to access it at any one particular point in time. That's a much more high-profile case than any one particular K-12 institution. So I don't think it's about a matter of frequency as much as it is a matter of media coverage and awareness and the size of the issue that we're dealing with at hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then just in terms of like this whole conversation, I know on HackSurfer.com we get a lot of people posting articles, and it seems like there's a lot of, or a good level of concern, with parents, kind of wondering how to keep their kids safe and kind of what they should do. So I guess Michael kind of wants to know that as well. He says, what can be improved or done better by parents or the schools to improve safety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty high-level, broad question. I can answer that certainly from the security side as well, from the cybersecurity side, as well as kind of from the digital workflow side, since we do have some cloud-based workflow management products here at Barracuda that I think are very useful for K-12, and we're actually seeing a pretty rapid adoption of those as we go forward. From a security perspective, I think it helps for the school to understand the policy that it's set in place or that has been put in place for it by the education board or by the superintendent or whomever it might be, and pick the appropriate solution that you need. So in the event of, let's say, you want to actually have granular access and granular control to Facebook, right? Let's say you want to allow your students to get to Facebook for their high school swim class or for their football program to know when practice is. But at the same time, you don't want your students to be watering their plants on Farmville, or you don't want them to be shooting up their friends on Mafia Wars, right? I think in those particular cases, being aware of the technology requirements that are necessary to enforce those controls are going to be very important. And I think that there's a lot of education that can be done both at the IT department of the K-12 organization, as well as sharing that information and that knowledge with teachers. So for this particular example, if you want to control Facebook traffic is secure traffic. It's SSL encrypted, right? And so looking for a content filtering vendor that can actually do SSL inspection to the level of granularity and to the level of degree that you can actually go and enforce these policies are going to be very, very important, right? Another example, if a school has policies where they want their teachers to be able to leverage the wealth of information that's on the internet to be able to teach their classes. A lot of times that actually kind of flies in the face of a lot of content filtering vendors because a lot of them can't dynamically classify websites, they can't categorize them the right way, so on and so forth, right? So it really becomes a workflow management issue. Most of the customers that we've talked to in the past have actually said, I actually spend 70 to 80% of my time actually just whitelisting particular websites so that teachers can access them for an hour so that they can teach this content, right? So in the example of an anatomy teacher that's trying to teach their class, their content may be classified as pornography, or a history teacher trying to teach about World War II, their content may be classified as violence or terrorism, right? So in those particular cases, it's about having products that actually enable the workflow better. So whether that be driving temporary access tokens or being able to offer delegated administration features down to the staff level, I think will be important as well. And so there's a lot that can be done to improve the security posture, I think, but I think more importantly, the problem that I see a lot of K-12 organizations dealing with right now is not so much just the security piece, but it's also how to actually manage it in an efficient and easy manner, to the point where it's not the IT admin that's frustrated, and the teachers aren't frustrated, and the parents aren't frustrated. I think at a high level, things like CIPA compliance has actually provided a decent amount of coverage and making sure that young children aren't exposed to inappropriate content. But the cost at which that happens, especially when you have content engines like Khan Academy and YouTube for Schools popping up every single day, teachers and students are much more sensitive to those and recognize the value of that, where I think the board and the IT departments have been a little bit slower to move in that direction. And so, another good example actually is around signature and document signing, right? If you think about the number of pieces of documents that you have to sign as a parent at the beginning of a school year, whether that's technology usage policies or social media usage policies or field trip permission slips, and then throughout the year you have report cards and other permission slips and progress reports to sign. There are security issues around there too, right? And we don't traditionally think about these types of things because they've been embedded in our system for so long. But the security issue around that is actually a student can actually just simply forge their parent's signature for all of these things, right? And think about how often that actually happens. It's not. I think it's not out of sight, out of mind, to the point where we say, oh, you know what, these are issues that we can't control. But if you actually had an electronic document signing process where you could actually manage parent signatures by giving them credentials that are tied to their students, and then being able to actually manage that from a centralized electronic system or cloud-based system, it makes the process not only much more secure, but it also makes it easier to manage and to leverage. So for example, we have a customer here that actually has a fully deployed one-to-one iPad program. They're actually leveraging our iPads or our MDM service to push down one of our electronic document signing signature apps, which is called Sign Now, and basically it's tied into the student directory, it's tied into the staff directory, so that parents are assigned their particular children's credentials, and they can sign all of the documents that they need digitally, right? And it's loaded on the iPad that the school has provided the student for their one-to-one initiative, but parents can also access it on their mobile phones, on their desktop, whatever it might be. And so at that point, if you have an electronic document, it's much harder for a student to be able to digitally sign that if they don't know their parents' passwords, than if they were to actually just take ink and pen and forge their signature and turn it in. So I think when we think about improving the security and the safety of schools and what can be done by parents or what can be done by the staff themselves, I think it's more than just a cybersecurity piece that we need to take into consideration, but also the workflow management aspect of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're coming up on the end of the half hour here. Just one final question I kind of wanted to get your opinion on.
Sure.
You sort of brought it up earlier. You mentioned sort of the topic of cyberbullying, and I guess that's one thing a lot of parents are always worried about. I was wondering if there's really anything that can be done about that from like a technological perspective, or if there's, or I don't know, just your thoughts in general, kind of on that problem.
Yeah, sure. So the way that we treat cyberbullying over things like social media here at Barracuda is kind of in a three-step process, right? And I, at some point, I've covered all three of them, but I'll give the whole story as far as how that particular feature or how that particular solution works here. I think the first piece of it is the control piece, is to be able to have granular control in what type of access you allow on Facebook and what type of access you allow on Twitter, right? So there are customers of ours that have read-only access or have implemented read-only access on Facebook. So their students can't post anything, but they can look at their news feeds all day. They can look at pictures, things of that nature, but they won't be able to actually post anything outside of the network. Or we have other customers who have blocked Facebook games or blocked Facebook chat so that they can't use those particular functions while they're on school campus. And so the first piece of it, I think, is about control and understanding what parts of Facebook may provide or have the potential to turn into a really bad situation and a really hairy situation, as opposed to what parts of Facebook actually offer collaborative value and benefit. The second piece of it is around monitoring. And when I say monitoring, I mean in the sense of being able to actually see the content that is being sent out of these school networks and out of these social networks, right? So if a student says something inappropriate to another student, and it's a keyword that is potentially flagged, or if a student, in my previous example, if a student searches for how to make a bomb or how to buy a gun on Google, you want to be able to not only monitor on that type of activity, but you also want to be alerted on it in a proactive manner should something happen, right? So the ability to say, hey, this particular student at this time on Facebook or on Google said this particular word is actually very important, and to be able to alert and notify the proper authorities of that in real time or in a timely manner, I think is very important. And then the third piece of that is actually the archiving piece. Most schools that we have as customers are subject to some kind of e-discovery requirement, to where they have to archive certain communications. And when you really think about archiving, I think most people think of it as email archiving, and that's kind of the end of it, right? All you need to really do is archive your emails. But the fact of the matter is most students don't use email. Even for the schools that have Google Apps for Education and their students have Google accounts, their students aren't the ones using email. The teachers are the ones using email. But in fact, the majority of your cyberbullying cases obviously have to do with student-to-student communication. And so if you're not being able to archive communication that happens over IM, or you're not being able to archive communication that happens over social media, you're actually missing out on the bulk of messages and the bulk of what's actually happening on your network. So we have a feature that actually integrates our content security solution with our archiving solution so that we can actually take all of those messages that are transacted over social media channels and actually archive them in the archiver, and then they basically are subject to the same retention period and policies that you would have for regular emails. But I think that is probably our version of how you combat things like cyberbullying in 3 steps: to be able to granularly control it, to be able to monitor and be able to be alerted on it in a proactive fashion, and then being able to have the archiving capabilities to be able to take into a court of law for any e-discovery requirements that you may have.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we appreciate you taking the time today to fill us in on all that.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jeff.
Yeah, everybody out there watching, have a good weekend. We'll be off next week, and then in the summer schedule, we're going to be doing these on Thursdays instead of Fridays. So everybody, enjoy your weekend.
Thanks a lot.